from Edward Cairns.
Is the sacking of Andy Gray by Sky an appropriate response to sexism or a nation losing its sense of humour?
This is the football commentator, for those of you who haven't seen the story, Andy Gray, who said of one of the linesmen or lineswomen at a football match that she didn't know the offside rule and various other unobliging or disobliging things. Sean Massey. Katie Hopkins, do you think they should have been sacked, or have we lost our sense of humour about this kind of thing?
I think Sky Sports has completely lost its sense of humour. I think as a nation, potentially, we have lost our collective sense of humour. I think people like Karen Brady, who have appointed herself patron saint of all things equal, does not speak on behalf of all of the sisterhood. I think women actually don't want equal treatment. They couldn't handle it if they got it, quite a number of them. It's a tough world out there. What a lot of women are actually asking for, and you can look aghast at this, is special treatment. If you look at all female shortlists for positions, is that equal treatment or is that special treatment? I think what women need to realise is that you have to toughen up. We can't ask for equal pay. You have to be paid on performance and you have to be paid for the results you deliver. It's a tough world out there, and I don't think Karen Brady and others are doing us any favours by putting this sort of debate out there. I think we have to just compete in what is a tough world. And finally, I think the art of banter is something we should be proud of as a nation. I worked for a while in the military, and our forces, the best in the world in my opinion, they survive on banter. If you ask any of the lads what they love about their job, part of that is the banter. And I think we need to keep that. We need to look after it. Do we want a world that's completely void of colour? Do we want everything to be magnolia? No, we don't. I think we need banter, and I think those poor guys have really died on their swords and have been stabbed in the back by people like Karen Brady.
Well, I don't think, Katie, you're doing anyone favours this evening. Look, I thought Sky made the right decision. I thought the sentiments expressed were bigoted, offensive, and have absolutely no place in the modern society that, thankfully, we live in now. The question is, I suppose, what conclusions we draw from the affair. And I'd say, on the one hand, I do think things have improved over the last couple of decades, and the fact that this has blown up into a big row, if you like, is evidence of that. I do wonder whether, if this had happened 2 decades ago, whether Andy Gray would have lost his job. And I think even David Cameron said, when he walked into Downing Street, that we were an open and more tolerant place to live. But I disagree with Katie. Conservative MP made some headlines, Dominic Raab, this week, by saying that he didn't think that actually discrimination was, particularly gender discrimination, was still a big issue, and that actually that kind of overt discrimination was not so evident. Kind of ironic that he should say that in the week that Andy Gray and Richard Keys left Sky over making some quite overt comments.
He said feminists are now amongst the most obnoxious bigots.
Well, look, before I entered Parliament, I was an employment lawyer, so I dealt and acted for people and employers too who were involved in discrimination issues. And we have made progress, but Katie, it's not perfect. You just look in the House of Commons, there are less than 200 female MPs. We do not have enough women in our boardrooms, and there's still a pay gap. There are still major issues that need to be addressed. And I actually also think football itself, in politics, we talk a lot about public service reform. We have got to reform the national game. It is ripe for reform.
But sort of, bring more women into it? Have more women?
Look,
what's it got to do with Andy Gray?
Well, culturally, the fact that you see those kinds of sentiments being expressed. There is a culture around football. I used to work at a football ground, Sellers Park Stadium, for several years. I've been around, but it needs to reform. it needs to reform its culture. It needs to kind of get with our modern times. And there are many other issues as well. Don't get me started on FIFA.
Okay, Edwina Curry.
I cheered when Andy Gray was sacked. Yes. Remember, he wasn't sacked just for the remarks, the off-colour remarks about the referee, which were made before she even had a chance to show her competence. He was sacked after a series of clips showing that he was making offensive and unpleasant remarks. He's a fat slob, you know, awful man, and I'm glad he's gone. I feel a bit sorry for Richard Keys because he did apologise, he did phone and apologise, and he did attempt to put things right, and I felt he could see what they had done wrong. I'd love to see the FA and FIFA and all the international football organisations recognising the worth of women's soccer. Our women's soccer team in this country and in the United States of America are a great deal more successful in international competition than the men's teams are. Right. What have they got to boast about?
You have to recognise...
I don't have to recognise. Just a minute, Katie. I listen to you.
You have to recognise that women's game is not as interesting for people to watch. People do not want to pay to watch it. You have to look at what the market...
Have you forgotten Bend It Like Beckham? Wasn't Keira Knightley gorgeous?
This is actually, that's a complete... That is, if I may say so, Katie, that is a complete red herring.
Have you watched a football match? Football match? Have you ever watched one?
I wouldn't be interested to, no.
So how can you say that it's not as interesting?
All right, let's leave female football match. Let's go to the woman in the fourth row there.
I think this whole issue is an interesting reflection on our society's attitude to women. I think had this been a racist comment or a comment against someone's religion, it would have been rightly outrageous and no one would have had the audacity to dismiss it as banter. I think prejudice as women is just as much an issue as any other kind of prejudice, and I don't think we should be prepared to stand for it just for the sake of equality.
Will Self.
I think that's probably right, but there's no doubt that a level of sexist banter exists in our society endemically. You would find it in the House of Commons. You'd find it just about everywhere. I think that the reason why this man was fired probably there are other ramifications. It may well be to do with the legal action, civil action he was thinking of bringing or was in the process of bringing against the News of the World. It's incredibly hypocritical of the Sky and another Murdoch company to get on its high horse about sexism when it's a major purveyor of what is effectively soft pornography itself, which is exploitative of women. And the most interesting thing to me, though, is the kind of delusional remarks of this man and of his colleague, and the general kind of atmosphere that surrounds these sports presenters, as if anybody really gave a damn about them. And the reason people watch Sky is because it has the deal to transmit live Premier League matches, beginning and end. Frankly, I think we could do with firing almost all television sports pundits and presenters and just have the sport.
These men are in public life. Some people are going to actually see them as role models, and quite frankly, they have to go by a higher standard, and I think the action that's happened has been absolutely right.
OK, and the woman over there, and then I go up there. Yes. Yeah.
I just find the whole news story totally out of proportion. These comments were sent in private. It's about a woman and an offside rule. It's nothing that you wouldn't hear down the pub. It's just so inane and boring, the whole story.
And so you think their sacking was
I think the sacking was totally overactive. I think there's an agenda with Andy Gray. Maybe they wanted to get rid of him and they had to find a way. And I think it's nothing to do with feminism. I think they were talking about decision, about it could have been a man or a woman. They don't know the offside rule.
It really wasn't just about a particular decision. It was typecasting women linesmen and referees as being unable to know the rules of the game in exactly the same way the person in the audience who said, look, we wouldn't put up with this for a minute if they had, for example, said, oh, they can't referee that game because they're Jewish. They can't referee that game because they're black. I mean, it's completely... What it's doing is no longer treating people as individuals, but treating them as somehow part of a group that should be demonised because they're not capable of doing a particular job.
And the reality, one final point.
which is that, you know, people who say that this is in some way a dead issue, just look in the labour market, Katie, at the fact that for exactly the same jobs, women are still paid less than men. And if we think that this is an old issue, it's not. It's a real issue still. And this is someone who is pulling down more than £1.5 million a year in a very big mainstream role. They will be role models, they will set opinion, and they need to behave better.
OK, I'll come to you.
I think we should just also remember that the official got the decision right.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely.
I mean, doesn't that make their comments all the more ludicrous?
OK, and the person behind with the scarf on. Yes, the woman, yeah.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I think he should have been sacked. I'm a businesswoman. I've worked hard all my life. And I think the lineswoman, I don't think she should have been targeted like that. And it wasn't actually what he said for me, it was the way he actually spoke it. And he said it on more than one occasion about different people.
There have been one or two columnists who've written saying that women have a licence to attack men in language that is thought unacceptable for men to attack women. What do you make of that? And there's that television programme, I can't remember what it's called.
Loose Women.
Loose women.
Is it Loose Women?
Yes, I'm sure that's right. And two wrongs don't make a right. And I would say if you hear banter, like the sort of stuff that Andy Gray was saying in the pub, challenge it.
That's right.
You do not have to put up with it. And you can do the challenge with a smile on your face, and you can look at the guy and say all sorts of comments about, no, probably you're a better example, all sorts of comments about and you can re-establish
Would you like to follow
equality.
through on that? Later.
But you should never just put up with it, because putting up with it is what leads to racism. It's what leads to evil. It's what leads to cruelty, because people who are cruel think they can get away with it.
I'll come to you, Katie, but what do you want about with Will Self? And what's the
well, now, the
deal
kind
here?
of women's banter you're thinking of is, whoa, fancy a bit of that. But you're an MP, I mustn't talk like that. Or making sort of
He's a married
negative
man.
remarks. I'm old enough to be their mother, I can say this sort of thing. Making negative remarks about somebody's appearance or their competence or their ability to do almost anything. That's banter.
What you meant to say was it's easier to make negative comments about my appearance than the very, very beautiful Churka. And I accept that. I'm OK with that.
And do you?
I'm not saying anything.
Very wise. Katie?
I think women are doing themselves a disservice. I think people are already cautious. I talk to small businesses. They're already cautious about employing women because of the issues surrounding it. And women don't do themselves any favour when we get in a flap about these kind of things. I think women can be strong in the workforce. We can be a real presence in the workforce, and we can stand up for ourselves in the workforce. And we certainly don't need two guys to be sacked to prove that the world is a more equal place.
OK. We'll go on, but just before we do, I'll just say a couple more points. The woman in the third row there.
I think it's one thing to say that women can prove themselves in the workforce, but the point I think you're missing, Katie, is that this woman hadn't had a chance to prove herself before she was completely condemned by two men who had this idea.
To take. And yes, and the woman there with the dark hair.
I'd like to say that the Football League have tried for many years to take racism and sexism out of the game, we footballers themselves. But I think the main thing is about inclusion, and women need to be included.
Right. Is there anybody, any other defenders of Katie's point of view before we move on?
Anybody with a sense of humour? Anybody? Anybody?
The man up there, you, sir. And you spoke...
Amusing banter is OK. This guy's joke was old, stale, totally out of date, and it really shows that he's not worth £1.7 million.
So that's the sackable offence.
Really asked the question, why were what were his bosses doing, paying him so much for so long?
OK, let's move on. Thank you very much.